The mare's breath came in wet, ragged pulls, and Isolde heard it before she saw the animal at all. She was crossing the low field behind her father's rectory at the edge of dawn, a basket of dry oats on her hip and the first hard frost of October crackling under her boots. The sound stopped her. It was the sound of a horse in trouble. She knew it the way she knew her own name. Her father had kept 2 coach horses until the debts came, and before that her mother had bred hunters in Kent. Isolde was 23 years old and had known the breathing of sick horses since she was 5. She left the basket in the grass and walked toward the sound. The mare was down in the ditch beyond the hedgerow, tangled in blackthorn, one foreleg folded under her at a wrong angle. Blood had dried in a long dark line from her shoulder to her knee. Her flanks were slick with sweat gone cold. She had been there some hours. Her eyes rolled white when Isolde came near, but she did not thrash. She was past thrashing. She had settled into that quiet place horses go when they have decided to die. Isolde knelt in the frost. The cold bit through the wool of her skirt at once. She spoke low, the way her mother had taught her, 3 soft words repeated until the mare's ear flicked toward her. Then she reached out and laid her bare hand on the mare's neck. The skin was hot. Fever then, on top of everything else. "I see you," Isolde said. "I see you, girl. You are not finished yet." She looked back toward the rectory. Her father was still asleep. Her sister Wren was still asleep. There was no one to send. She did what she could alone. She cut the blackthorn away with the small knife she carried for garden work. She freed the folded leg without moving it. She spoke the whole time in the low, steady voice her mother had used on frightened animals for 30 years. The mare was a beautiful thing under the mud and blood. Dark bay, near black in the poor light, with a white star on her forehead shaped like a badly torn page. Her tack was gone. Someone had cut the saddle off her in a hurry, or she had rolled and broken the girth herself. There was a raw place on her side where a stirrup iron had ground into the skin. Isolde ran back to the rectory. She woke Wren without waking their father. She dragged the little handcart from the stable, and she and Wren together, using 2 long planks and every bit of strength they had between them, worked the mare out of the ditch and onto the cart. It took nearly an hour. The mare tried to help them. That was the worst part, Isolde thought later, remembering it. The mare tried to help them. She placed her one good foreleg where Isolde touched, and she pushed with her hind legs when Wren pressed her rump, and she went nearly limp with trust when Isolde finally got her upright on 3 legs beside the cart. They walked her to the small stable behind the rectory, one careful step at a time. Isolde had not owned a horse in 6 years. The stable was clean because Isolde had cleaned it every spring anyway, out of habit and hope. There was fresh straw because she had cut and dried it herself in August, for the neighbour's donkey when it needed a place to foal. She led the mare in and closed the half door, and only then did she sit down on the overturned bucket and let her hands shake. Wren stood in the doorway. Wren was 17, freckled, thin as a whip, sensible as bread. Who does she belong to? I do not know. Someone will come looking. Someone will. Wren chewed her lip. Father will say we cannot afford to feed her. I know. He will say we ought to have sent for the farrier and let the farrier decide. I know that too. Wren looked at the mare. The mare had put her nose against Isolde's shoulder and left it there. She chose you, Wren said, and went back to the house. That was the first day. On the second day the fever climbed, and Isolde sat up all night with cool water and vinegar rags. On the third day the fever broke, and the Mary drank a whole bucket, and Isolde wept for 1 hard minute against the mare's warm neck, and then wiped her face and went to make breakfast. On the 5th day the swelling in the foreleg began to come down, and Isolde understood, cautiously, that the bone had not broken. It was a bad wrench. A very bad wrench. But the bone had held. On the 10th day the mare put weight on the leg for the first time, and Isolde said out loud to no one in the empty stable, "Well done, girl, well done. Well done." And the mare, whose name Isolde did not know, whose owner Isolde did not know, blew warm breath into her hair. By then the frost had settled in over the whole of Hertfordshire. Every morning the puddles in the yard were skinned with ice. Every morning Isolde broke the ice on the water trough with the flat of a shovel, and the sound of it carried across the frozen field like a small bell. The air smelled of wood smoke and old apples and the leather of the mare's bridle, which Isolde had cleaned and mended and hung on a peg, though the mare had no saddle to go with it. That was the palate of those weeks. Wood smoke, leather, frost, oats, and a faint sweet undertone of the ointment Isolde was rubbing into the raw place on the mare's side twice a day. Her father found out on the 8th day. He came into the stable looking for a rake and stopped where he stood. He was a thin man with kind eyes and a permanent worried line between his brows. Isolde, I know. Whose is she? I do not know yet. You cannot feed a stranger's horse for weeks and not ask. I have asked. I sent word to the coaching inn at Hatfield. I sent word to the farrier at Welwyn. No one has answered. Her father looked at the mare. The mare looked back at him with the calm, bright eye of an animal that has been well cared for by someone else's daughter for 8 days. If nobody comes, he said slowly, we cannot keep her. You know that. I know. And if somebody comes, they must pay us for the feed. They must. He nodded once, tired. He touched her shoulder as he went out. He did not scold her. He never really scolded her. He only sometimes looked at her and remembered his wife, and then he could not speak for a moment. Isolde saw it happen and pretended, as she always did, not to see. Nobody came for 3 weeks. In those 3 weeks the news of the missing horse travelled, but not to the rectory. It travelled instead along the road between the great house at Marchwood and the town of Hertford, and then to London, and then back again in the mouths of grooms and coachmen and the tavern-keepers who fed them. The horse belonged to the Duke of Marchwood, and the Duke of Marchwood was not a man one wanted to disappoint. He had been thrown, they said, thrown in the dark, on the London road. On a night he had ridden alone in a temper. His people had found him at dawn walking home with a bruised shoulder and a face like winter. The mare was gone. He had sent men in every direction. He had offered a reward. And then, when no mare was found, he had gone quiet. And his people had gone quiet, and the household at Marchwood had folded around him like a hand around a burn. Isolde knew none of this. The rectory was a small place. The news that reached it came filtered through the butcher and the post, and neither the butcher nor the post had reason to speak of the Duke to a country parson's daughter. Meanwhile, a different piece of news was travelling toward the rectory with much greater speed. It arrived on the 22nd morning, in the form of a letter in the form of Isolde's father, sitting down slowly at the breakfast table and setting the letter down beside his teacup, with the careful movement of a man who has just been struck. Isolde, Wren. They came. There is a... He stopped. Started again. There has been a proposal. Concerning you. Concerning who? Wren said. Isolde. The kitchen went very still. Even the kettle seemed to hold its breath. Their father would not look at Isolde. He looked at the letter. He read parts of it aloud in a voice that grew steadier as it went, the way a man's voice will sometimes, when he has decided that steadiness is the only kindness left. The letter was from the Duke of Marchwood. It was not a love letter. It was not even, strictly, a letter of proposal. It was a business arrangement laid out in 3 plain paragraphs by the Duke's steward on behalf of his master. It said that His Grace had been made aware, through channels the letter did not specify, of the situation at the rectory, the debts, the mortgage on the glebe, the illness of Isolde's late mother that had eaten through the last of the family's private funds. It said that His Grace had also been made aware of the character of the elder daughter of the house, Miss Isolde Ashcombe, who was reputed to be a serious young woman of good sense and good hands. It said that His Grace, for reasons of his own that did not require explanation, wished to marry. That he required a wife who could manage the running of a great house and who would not be a fool. That he had no interest in the London season, and no interest in a wife who did. That in exchange for the hand of Miss Ashcombe, he was prepared to settle the debts of the rectory, provide a pension for its incumbent, and see to the establishment of the younger sister at whatever school or situation the family thought best. The Duke would arrive on the 15th of November to sign the settlement. The wedding would take place the following morning at the parish church. Isolde would be conveyed to Marchwood after the ceremony. His Grace regretted the shortness of the arrangement and hoped Miss Ashcombe would find nothing in it objectionable. There was no line in the letter about affection. There was no line about meeting first. There was, at the very bottom, a signature, not the Duke's, but the steward's, and the Duke's seal pressed into red wax beside it. Isolde sat very still. Wren was crying without any noise. Her father was looking at his hands. "You do not have to accept," her father said when he could speak. "It is my failure that brought us here, not yours. If you say no, we will manage. We have managed before." "Have we?" Isolde said, and it was not cruel, only tired. He did not answer. She looked down at her own hands. They were red from the cold and streaked from ointment. There was straw in the cuff of her sleeve. She thought about her father getting older. She thought about Wren, who was clever, who could be a governess in a good house if there was money for a proper wardrobe and a proper introduction. She thought about the mare in the stable outside, who had put her nose against Isolde's shoulder on the first day and left it there. She thought about the Duke of Marchwood, who was a name to her, and nothing more. She had never been to Marchwood. She had never been to any of the great houses. The Duke in her mind was a shape without a face, a heavy dark coat, and a signature in red wax. "I will accept," she said. Her father closed his eyes. "Do not," Isolde said. "Do not, please, Papa. It is done. Let it be done." She stood up and went out to the stable, because that was the only place in the world she still felt like herself. The mare turned her head as she came in. Isolde walked to her and put her forehead against the warm, dark neck and stood there, and the mare stood very still, and neither of them moved for a long time. The 15th of November was a Tuesday. It was cold and dry, and the sky was the pale, hard blue of a mussel shell. Isolde got up before it was light and did the mare's dressing herself. The raw place on the flank was almost closed. The foreleg carried weight now for hours at a time. In another month, Isolde thought, this horse could be ridden gently. In 3 months she would be sound. It was a fine, brave animal, and Isolde knew, with the private pride of anyone who has healed something, that she had done good work. She dressed for the signing in her mother's second-best gown, grey wool with a plain lace collar. She had no jewellery. She wore her mother's small garnet ring, the only one that had not been sold. Her hair she braided plainly and pinned close to her head. Wren stood behind her in their small bedroom and did not speak. There was nothing left to say that would help. The Duke's carriage arrived at 11. It was a heavy black thing pulled by 4 grey horses. 2 outriders came with it. A steward stepped down first, a thin grey man with a tidy folder of papers. Then, after a long moment in which the horses stamped and blew great clouds of frost into the cold air, the Duke himself stepped down. Isolde was watching from the parlour window. He was tall. He was, she saw at once, no older than perhaps 32 or 33. His hair was dark and cropped short. His coat was very fine but not showy. He had a face that did not smile, and a mouth that looked as though it had not had reason to. His left arm he held a little stiffly against his side, and she remembered, distantly, some rumour that had reached her weeks ago about the Duke of somewhere having taken a fall. He looked, she thought, exactly like a man who had bought a wife because he did not want to spend an hour more of his life pretending to court one. She went down to meet him. They met in the parlour. Her father was there. The steward was there. Wren had been sent, gently, out. The Duke bowed. Isolde curtsied. He said, "Miss Ashcombe." She said, "Your Grace." That was the sum of their courtship. He asked her 3 questions. Could she read and write? She said yes. Could she manage a household of 30 servants? She said she had never managed 30, but she had managed the rectory and its 2, and she believed the principle was the same. Could she? He asked, and this was the only question in which his voice altered even slightly. Could she tolerate the company of a man who did not intend to be a lively husband? She looked at him. "I do not know yet, Your Grace," she said. "I have not tried." The steward's pen stopped scratching. Her father made a small sound. The Duke, for the first time, looked at her fully, and something moved at the back of his eyes that she could not name. It was gone in a moment. He nodded once. An honest answer. "Thank you." The papers were signed. The Duke took tea he did not drink. He said the correct, polite things to her father. He looked once around the small parlour with its worn carpet and its water-stained ceiling and gave nothing at all away in his face. He did not, at any point, ask to see the mare in the stable behind the house. He did not, at any point, know she was there. He left within the hour. The wedding the next morning was so small it was barely a wedding. Isolde's father performed it in his own church. Wren stood as witness. The Duke's steward stood as the other. Isolde wore the same grey gown. The Duke wore the same dark coat. The parish clerk played the small wheezing organ, and afterward Isolde signed her new name in the parish register, with a hand that shook only once, at the very end. Her father held her for a long moment at the church door. He said, "You are a good girl. You have always been a good girl." Wren clung to her waist. The Duke waited by the carriage, looking at nothing. Isolde said her goodbyes. She went to the carriage. She turned back once. She could not help it. She turned back and looked at the rectory stable, where the mare stood in her half-door watching. The mare's ears were pricked. The mare, Isolde understood in that moment, was going to be walked over to a neighbour's farm in the afternoon and boarded there for the winter, and Isolde did not know when she would see her again. And there was no dignified way to say goodbye to a horse in front of a duke, so Isolde only looked at her, and the mare only looked back, and then Isolde got into the carriage and did not turn again. Marchwood was 30 miles away. They arrived at dusk. The house was enormous. It rose out of the frozen park like a small city carved of pale stone. There were more windows in the front elevation than there were rooms in the whole rectory. There were more servants standing on the front steps to greet them than Isolde had ever seen in one place, and each of them curtsied or bowed in turn as she stepped down, and each of them called her "Your Grace," in the same careful, watchful voice. The Duke walked her through the hall himself. He named the housekeeper. He named the butler. He named a woman called Mrs. Pruitt, who would be Isolde's own maid. He said without embarrassment that her rooms and his rooms were at opposite ends of the east wing, that she would not be disturbed at any hour by him, that she was free to make of her rooms and of the running of the house whatever she liked. He said, "You will find, I think, that I am not often at home. When I am, I dine at 7. You are welcome to join me. You are not required to." She said, "Thank you." He bowed to her at the foot of the great staircase and left her to Mrs. Pruitt. That was her wedding night. She sat in a chair by the fire for a long time with her hands folded in her lap, still in her grey gown, still with the garnet ring turned inward on her finger. The rooms were beautiful and cold. There were fresh flowers on every table, orchids brought from the succession houses, out of season and bright as small strange birds. There was a book left open on the writing desk, chosen by someone who did not know her at all, in a language she could not read. There was, beside the bed, a bell pull she did not touch. She got up and walked to the window. The park stretched away in the moonlight. She could see the roof of the great stable-yard beyond the west wing, dark and shining under frost. She thought of the mare in Hertfordshire, warm in a borrowed stall, and she thought of herself, warm in this rich, cold room. And she could not tell for a moment which of them had been given the better arrangement. Then she went to bed and slept badly. In the morning, everything began. She learned the house. She learned it the way she had learned the mare, patiently, with her hands, from the ground up. She met each servant properly, one by one, and asked their names, and remembered them. She walked through every room with the housekeeper and asked about draughts and damp and which chimneys smoked. She read the ledgers. She corrected 2 small errors in the ledgers, quietly, without making the steward look foolish, and the steward, who was a proud man, noticed and gave her a very small, very grudging bow the next morning at the study door. She discovered in the first week that the Duke was not lying when he said he was rarely at home. He rode out at dawn each day. He returned at dusk. He dined with her at 7 formerly, and spoke to her of household matters with the exact polite attention he would have given a very competent secretary. He asked her nothing about herself. She asked him nothing about himself. They were, for those first weeks, 2 courteous strangers sharing a very large silence and a very good soup. She discovered in the second week that he was in pain. She saw it once at breakfast when he reached across the table for the salt and something in his left shoulder caught. His face did not change, but his hand paused for the briefest moment. And Isolde, who had watched a horse decide not to thrash, recognized the pause. She said nothing. She simply, the next morning, moved the salt to his side of the table before he came down. She discovered in the third week that he was not universally beloved among his own people. She had thought, from the way the servants had bowed at her arrival, that he was worshipped. He was not. He was respected. He was feared, a little. But there was a coolness in the eyes of some of the older staff when they spoke of him, and Isolde could not place it, and did not ask. She discovered in the fourth week why the person who told her, though not in so many words, was the Duke's younger brother. His name was Corin. He arrived without warning on a raw wet morning in December, threw his gloves at the butler, kissed Isolde's hand with a great deal of practiced charm, and installed himself in the library with the ease of a man who had grown up in the house and considered himself its rightful heir. He was 2 years younger than the Duke, fair where the Duke was dark, quick-smiling where the Duke was still. Isolde disliked him within 10 minutes and could not immediately have said why. He stayed 3 days. He drank the Duke's brandy. He laughed too easily at his own remarks. He watched Isolde across the dinner table with the frank measuring look of a man appraising livestock at a fair, and when the Duke was not in the room he asked her questions that were not quite proper questions. How she had slept, how she found her rooms, whether the household suited her, whether she was lonely. On the second evening, when the Duke had gone out to look at a lame carriage horse in the stable yard, and Isolde was left alone with Corin over the port neither of them was drinking, he leaned back in his chair and smiled at her, and said the sentence that Isolde would remember for the rest of her life. "You know," he said, "he did not buy you for you. He bought you because Mother would not stop shrieking about the succession, and you were the cheapest well-bred womb in 3 counties. Do try not to imagine yourself into anything grander." The room did not go silent. The fire crackled on. A footman by the door made no sign that he had heard. Isolde set down her glass very carefully. She did not answer. She looked at Corin for a long, steady moment, the way she had once looked at a dog that had bitten a child. She stood up. She said, "Good night, sir," in a voice like clean water. She walked out of the room. She did not sleep. She sat by the fire in her wrapper and looked at her hands and told herself, over and over, that she had known this. She had known this on the day the letter arrived. She had known this on the morning she stepped into the carriage. She had married a man who had never pretended otherwise. Corin had only said the plain thing aloud. Corin had done her, in a way, a kindness. She did not feel kindly toward him for it. Corin left in the morning. The Duke saw him off in the front hall. Isolde watched from the top of the stairs. She did not go down. When the carriage had gone, the Duke stood for a moment in the middle of the empty hall, looking at nothing. One hand pressed lightly to his left shoulder, as if it had begun to ache again. Then he went to his study and shut the door. That night at dinner he looked at her across the long table and said, quite calmly, "My brother said something to you last night." "What was it?" She did not lie. She was not, by nature, a liar. But she did not tell him the words. "He said what he thought I needed to hear," she said. I did not need to hear it. I already knew it. The Duke's face did not change. His fork did not move. Was he cruel? He was honest. That is not the same thing. No, Your Grace. It is not. He set his fork down. For the first time since she had come to Marchwood, he did not look like a man performing a courteous transaction. He looked like a man who had been hit somewhere that already hurt. "I would prefer," he said slowly, "that you tell me the words. I would prefer not to, Your Grace." He nodded. Once, he picked up his fork again. They finished the meal in the same silence in which they had begun it. But when she rose to leave the table, he stood as well, which he did not always do, and he said, at the door, in a low voice that no servant heard, "He will not come again while you are in this house." I give you my word. He kept it. Corin did not come to Marchwood again that winter. The winter went on. It was a long winter. The snows came early and stayed. The park was buried. The lake at the foot of the south lawn froze thick enough to walk on, and the tenants' children skated on it in the afternoons, and Isolde watched them from the library window with her hands wrapped around a cooling cup of tea and thought about her sister Wren, who had by now been settled with a very respectable widow in Bath as a companion, and who wrote long affectionate letters every week, describing the pump room and the shops and a certain young curate she had met at church. Isolde wrote back. She wrote every week. She did not tell Wren that she and the Duke of Marchwood had, in 8 weeks of marriage, exchanged perhaps 40 sentences that were not about menus or coal. In the 9th week, something changed. It changed because of a horse. There was, at Marchwood, an enormous stable yard behind the west wing, a long low building of red brick with a cobbled yard and stalls for 30 horses. Isolde had been in it exactly twice, once on her arrival, being shown it as part of the house, and once in the 2nd week, when she had gone out to see the carriage horses because she could not help herself. Both times she had felt watched, and had not stayed. The Duke's grooms were courteous but wary. The head coachman was a man of about 60 called Barnaby, grey-bearded and slow-spoken, who had, she gathered, been at Marchwood since the Duke was a boy. On a still grey morning in early February, she walked out to the stable-yard again. She had not planned it. She had simply woken up and known she needed the smell of horses. She wore her heaviest wool cloak and her plainest boots, and she carried, without quite knowing why, a small pot of the ointment she had used all autumn on the mare in the rectory stable. It was in her pocket. She had brought it from Hertfordshire in the bottom of her trunk without unpacking it. She walked down the length of the stable-yard and looked at each horse in turn. They were beautiful animals, all of them, but Isolde had grown up around horses, and she saw at once that 2 of the carriage horses had thrush in their frogs, and one of the hunters had a windgall on his near hind. Small things. Not urgent. But not what she would have expected in a stable of this quality. At the far end, in the last stall on the right, she found something that stopped her. The stall was dark. There was a horse in it, but the door was closed to the top, which was unusual on a morning as still as this one. She could hear breathing inside. She stepped up to the door and looked over. It was the mare. She stared. It was not possible. It was not possible, and yet the mare stared back at her out of the dim stall, with the white star on her forehead, shaped like a badly torn page, and the small raw patch on her flank that Isolde had rubbed with ointment for 6 weeks running, and the ears that pricked forward when Isolde said, without meaning to, out loud, "Oh, behind her," a voice said, "Your Grace?" She turned. It was Barnaby, the head coachman. He had come up the yard behind her, silent as old men in stable-yards always were. He was looking at her with something she could not read. "This horse," she said, and her voice did not sound like her own. Barnaby looked at the mare. He looked back at Isolde. His weathered face did not move. "His Grace's own mare," he said. "Fell with him on the London road last October. Broke her leg, we thought. Vanished into a ditch somewhere between here and Hatfield. Found her 3 weeks ago in a paddock outside Welwyn, where a country parson had left her boarded. His Grace paid the parson handsomely for the care of her, and brought her home in a slow wagon over 2 days, so as not to strain the leg. He rides her out an hour every morning in the paddock now, to strengthen the tendon. Says she will be sound by spring." Isolde put a hand on the door of the stall. She needed to hold on to something. "He paid the parson," she said carefully. "Very handsomely, Your Grace. Enough to see the parson's daughter through a season in Bath," I heard the steward say. His Grace was pleased with the care she had received. He said whoever had tended her had known what they were doing. He said the mare would not have lived otherwise. Isolde could not speak. "He does not ride her far," Barnaby went on, mistaking her silence. "The tendon is still knitting. He says he will not ask her to carry him again until she is fully sound. He says he owes her that." Isolde stood very still. The stable-yard smelled of clean straw and old leather, and the good sharp smell of horses in winter. Somewhere behind her a groom whistled tunelessly, and a bucket clanged against a stall door, and a cat crossed the cobbles carrying a mouse. She heard all of it, and none of it. She was looking at the mare, and the mare was looking at her, and the mare, after a long moment, took 2 limping steps forward and put her nose against Isolde's shoulder and left it there. Barnaby's face changed. Even Barnaby, who had seen everything, whose face did not move for princes or plague, went slack for one instant with astonishment. "Your Grace," he said. "She has not let a soul near her but His Grace since we brought her home. She threatens the grooms. She bites the boy who cleans her stall. I know," Isolde said quietly. "I know her. She stayed in the stable a long time. She let herself into the stall and did what needed doing." The raw place on the flank was nearly healed, but still tender, and she rubbed a little of the ointment from her pocket into it, with the same slow, careful motion she had used every morning for 6 weeks in Hertfordshire. The mare stood for her without moving. Barnaby watched from the doorway and did not speak. At last she came out. "Say nothing of this to His Grace, please," she said to Barnaby. "Not yet." The old man looked at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he bowed. It was the deepest bow anyone had made her since she had come to Marchwood. She walked back to the house slowly. The snow was starting again, thin and quiet, and it fell on her cloak and her uncovered hair and did not melt. She thought, as she walked, about a great many things. She thought about a man on the London road in the dark in October, thrown from his horse in a temper, walking home with a bruised shoulder and telling nobody. She thought about a man sending a steward, weeks later, to fetch a horse he had been told was dead. She thought about a man paying a country parson far more than the mare's care was worth, because the mare was alive. And because the mare would only have been alive if someone at that rectory had known what they were doing. She thought about a man who, 3 weeks after that, had signed a marriage settlement for the parson's elder daughter. She thought about a great many things. She did not yet know what to do with any of them. She said nothing at dinner. He said nothing either. He asked her about the coal bill. She answered. He asked her about a letter from the estate at Portsmouth. She answered. He did not at any point mention the mare in the last stall of the stable-yard. He did not at any point mention that his shoulder was hurting him worse in the cold, though she could see it in the careful way he held his fork. He did not mention any of it. She watched him. She watched him the way she had watched the mare in the ditch, the way she had watched the mare rise for the first time on 3 legs, the way she had watched the mare take her first careful step in the stable-yard that morning. She said, quite suddenly, into the silence between them, "I would like to ride out with you tomorrow morning, if I may." He looked up. He was surprised. He did not immediately hide it. "You ride? I ride. I was not told. You were not asked." He set down his glass. There was a very small pause, and something in the corner of his mouth almost moved. "At 7? "At 7. She rose at 6:30. She wore her mother's old habit, which had been packed at the bottom of her trunk since November, and had not yet been unpacked. It fit her still. She braided her hair tightly. She met the Duke in the stable-yard at 7 exactly, and Barnaby, who was already there, did not look at either of them but had 2 horses ready, the Duke's dark bay hunter and, for her, a well-mannered grey mare of about 15 hands, gentle in the eye. She let herself be tossed up into the saddle. She settled the reins. She looked across at the Duke. "Which way?" "The paddock first," he said. "I have an animal there I look in on each morning." She said nothing. She rode beside him out of the stable-yard and around the end of the west wing and up the small rise to the paddock beyond it, and there, in the pale February light, was the mare, standing at the paddock rail with her ears pricked, watching them come. The Duke swung down. He did it awkwardly, favouring the left shoulder, and Isolde did not offer to help because she knew, without being told, that offering to help was the one thing he would not want. He walked to the paddock rail. The mare came to him at once. He put his gloved hand under her jaw. She lipped at his sleeve. He said something to her too low for Isolde to hear, and the mare's ears flicked, listening. Isolde sat on the grey mare a little way back and watched. Her chest ached, quite sharply. She had not expected this. She had not expected the way the Duke's face changed when the mare came to him. She had not expected the way his gloved hand touched the mare's neck, or the way, when the mare put her nose against his shoulder, he closed his eyes for one short second in the cold grey light. Then she swung down from the grey. She did it quietly. She walked up to the paddock rail beside him. She did not speak. The mare turned her head and looked at Isolde. Her ears came forward. She took one step, and then another, and she put her nose against Isolde's shoulder in exactly the same place, in exactly the same way, as she had done in the ditch behind the rectory on a frost-bitten morning in October. Isolde felt, rather than saw, the Duke go very still beside her. There was a long moment. "She knows you," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, how?" Isolde put her bare hand on the mare's warm neck. The mare's coat was rougher than it had been in autumn, thickened for winter, but the muscle under it was familiar to her palm. "I pulled her out of a ditch behind my father's rectory on the 12th of October, she said quietly. "I kept her 3 weeks. The fever broke on the 3rd day. The bone had not broken, only the tendon. I fed her, and I sat up with her, and I dressed her flank twice a day. Her tack was gone. I never knew who she belonged to. Nobody came. Then a man from a stable in Welwyn came for her 3 weeks later and paid my father a great deal of money for her care, and I understood that her owner had been found. My father is not a wealthy man, Your Grace. That money went to my sister's establishment in Bath. Almost all of it. The Duke did not move. I did not know it was you, she said. I did not know until this morning." For a very long time he said nothing. The mare stood between them, quiet, her breath making small white clouds in the cold air. Somewhere across the park a rook called, and another answered. Then he said, "Why did you not tell me last night? At dinner." I did not know how. That was all he said for a moment. Then he took off his glove. He did it slowly. He put his bare hand on the mare's neck beside hers, and he did not touch Isolde, but the backs of their hands were an inch apart on the warm, dark hide, and neither of them moved. "I was told," he said, and his voice was different now, quieter, that a country parson at Ashcombe had kept her alive through the fever. "I was told the daughter of the house had done the work. I was told the daughter had good hands and better sense. I asked more questions than were strictly proper. I asked whether the daughter was of an age to marry. I was told that she was. I was told that the family was in some difficulty. He stopped. He looked away, out across the paddock. I did not know how to say to a stranger, in a first letter, that I had chosen her because she had saved my horse. It seemed a foolish reason. It seemed a small reason. I did not want to insult her by naming it. So I named nothing. Isolde could not breathe for a moment. "You could have named it," she said. "I was afraid you would think I was mad. I would have thought you were honest." He turned his head then and looked at her. He looked at her fully, without hiding anything, and Isolde saw for the first time what his eyes actually were. Grey, tired, careful. The eyes of a man who had been taught early not to want things because wanting them was inconvenient. She saw all of it in one long, slow moment in which the mare between them breathed in and out, and the rooks called across the park, and the pale February light lay on the frozen grass like a thin blanket. "My brother," he said, quite suddenly. "What did he say to you?" The real words. "Your Grace." Isolde. She had not heard him use her Christian name before. He said it as though he had been saying it silently for weeks. She told him. She told him the exact sentence Corin had used. She did not soften it. She watched his face while she said it, and she saw the colour leave his mouth, and she saw the muscle in his jaw jump, and she saw him decide, in a way that she could feel, that he would deal with his brother later and not in front of her. "That was not why I chose you," he said. "I know that now, Your Grace. Not for that. Not for that, I know. For the horse. Only for the horse. And for I did not want a wife who would perform. I wanted a wife who would work. Who would—" He stopped again. He looked down at their hands, an inch apart on the mare's neck. "I did not think I would like you. I did not think I would need to. I thought that would be easier for both of us. And—" He was quiet a long time. "I have miscalculated," he said. Isolde laughed. She could not help it. It came out small and surprised, and the mare's ear flicked toward the sound, and the Duke's mouth, for the first time she had ever seen, did an odd small thing that was very nearly a smile. They stood there. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The Duke moved his hand at last, just half an inch, and the side of his little finger touched the side of hers on the mare's warm neck, and neither of them looked down, and neither of them moved away. Later, walking the horses back toward the stable-yard side by side, he said, without looking at her, "I owe you her life. I owe you a great deal more than the settlement paid for. You owe me nothing, Your Grace. Alistair. I beg your pardon? My name, if you please." She did not answer at once. Then she said, in the same clean water voice she had used to Corin the month before, "Alistair, then, you owe me nothing. I would like," he said carefully, "to be permitted to disagree. You may disagree. May I disagree at dinner? This evening. And every evening after." She looked ahead at the stable-yard, at Barnaby waiting for the horses, at the pale winter sky over the roof of the west wing. "Yes," she said. They dined that night not in the great dining room, but in the small breakfast room, which was Isolde's suggestion and which he did not question. There were only 2 footmen. There were candles, but the palette of the room was not candlelight and silk. It was wood smoke from the fire, and the leather of the books on the wall behind them, and the good clean smell of the roast pheasant, and, faintly, the last traces of the ointment on Isolde's hands from the paddock that morning. He noticed the ointment. He said nothing about it, but she saw him notice. They talked, that evening, for the first time. Not about coal, not about menus. She asked him about the fall in October. He told her. He had been riding home too fast, in a temper because of a letter from his mother about the succession. The mare had stumbled in a rut. He had come off badly. He had walked 6 miles home in the dark. He had believed the mare dead, and had not gone looking for her the next morning, because he could not bear to. It had been his groom, 3 weeks later, who had heard a rumour of a bay mare healing at a country rectory in Hertfordshire, and had ridden out on his own initiative to see. "Your groom found her," Isolde said. "Not you, not me. I could not bring myself. But you paid my father. I did more than pay him. I made inquiries about his family. I made inquiries about his elder daughter. And then you wrote a business letter. And then I wrote a business letter, which said nothing about the horse. Which said nothing about the horse." She looked at him across the little table. He looked back at her. Neither of them looked away. "You are a very strange man, Alistair, so I have been told." Later, much later, when the plates had been cleared, and the footman sent away, and the fire had burned down to a red heart, she asked him one more question. "Why did you never ask, in these 8 weeks, whether I had liked the house, whether I was homesick, whether I was—" Well, he was quiet a moment. "Because I did not know how to ask without frightening you. Because I thought a woman who had been fetched from a rectory in a business carriage would not want to be asked, by the man who fetched her, whether she was happy. Because I thought silence was more courteous than intrusion. Because I was a coward, in this one particular matter, and had decided it was tact. That is a great deal of because. I have been thinking about it." "For how long?" "Since November." The fire made a small sound. Isolde looked at her hands in her lap. She looked at his hand on the arm of his chair, the long fingers, the small white scar across the knuckles she had never noticed before. "I did not want to come here," she said. "You should know that. I did not want to come. I signed because my father is old, and my sister needed a season, and there was no other way. I did not come to Marchwood in hope. I came in, resignation, I know. You knew. I saw it in the parlour. On the 15th of November, when you answered my 3rd question. Ah, I hoped in time that we might make of resignation something a little kinder. I did not hope for more than that. And now." He looked at her a long time. "Now," he said, "I hope for more than that." She did not answer. She did not need to. She reached across the small table and laid her hand over his hand on the arm of his chair. She did not lace their fingers. She did not squeeze. She simply laid her hand over his and left it there, the way the mare had laid her nose against Isolde's shoulder on the first morning, in the ditch. The winter thawed slowly through the end of February and into a wet grey March. The lake broke up with a sound like distant cannon fire on the 4th of the month. The snowdrops came out under the beech trees along the drive. The mare's tendon healed. By the middle of March she was carrying the Duke at a walk down the length of the long paddock and back. By the beginning of April she was trotting. Isolde rode out with him every morning. He did not ask her to. She did not ask his permission. It had become a thing that was simply the case, in the way that certain domestic arrangements become simply the case between people who are learning each other slowly and without hurry. She discovered, in that time, a great many small things. She discovered that he read poetry in the evenings when he thought no one was looking, and that he was embarrassed to be seen doing it. She discovered that he was patient with the youngest stable boy, a boy of about 9 called Kester, who had trouble reading and whom the Duke had quite privately arranged to have taught in the evenings by the estate schoolmaster. She had not known this until the schoolmaster, meeting her by chance in the village lane, mentioned it with a warmth that made it clear he loved his master for it. The Duke, when she came home, was in his study. He did not know that she knew. She did not tell him. She simply, that night at dinner, poured his wine herself without asking a footman to do it, and he looked up in mild surprise and did not remark on it, and neither did she. She discovered, too, that he had written to his brother in early February, and that Corin had left the country. She did not ask what had been in the letter. She did not need to. She discovered, one evening in April, walking with him along the top terrace after dinner in the last of the daylight, with the smell of new grass rising from the park and the rooks calling for their nests, that she had begun to look forward to the sound of his boots in the corridor outside her sitting room each morning. She said this to him. He was silent a long time. Then he said, "I have begun to look forward to a great many things I did not previously expect to." He said it looking straight ahead at the park. He did not look at her. She did not look at him. They walked on. The mare was ridden out of the park for the first time in May. The Duke took her at a gentle pace along the ridge above the lake. Isolde rode the grey beside him. The bluebells were out under the beeches. The mare put her ears forward and her step was clean, and even, and the Duke, without looking at Isolde, said, "She is sound. She is sound. I thought I had lost her." I know. I thought, a great many things, that morning last October, that I had lost. Isolde reined in. The grey stopped, the Duke reined in too, and the bay mare stopped, and they sat looking at each other over the small distance between the horses, with the bluebells everywhere below them like a spilled sky. "You did not lose her," Isolde said quietly. "No, you did not lose anything, in the end." "No," he said. "In the end, I did not." He reached across the space between the horses. He held out his gloved hand. She reached back. Their fingers met above the withers of the bay mare, and the mare stood as still for them as she had stood in the ditch on the first day. They came back down through the beechwood at a walk. The mare's hooves made soft sounds on the leaf mould. The grey followed at her shoulder. The last light of the May afternoon slanted low through the trees in long green bars, and Isolde, riding a little behind him now, watched the shape of his shoulders against that light, and thought about a letter delivered to a rectory in November, and a business carriage on a Tuesday morning, and a mare in a ditch on a frost-bitten October dawn, and how each of those, small, cold, ordinary things had been, without her knowing it, a small door opening onto the life she was now inside. At the edge of the wood he turned in the saddle and looked back at her. He did not smile. He did not speak. He only looked, and waited, and when she brought the grey up level with the bay he set his hand on the mare's neck and left it there, warm and steady, until Isolde laid her own hand on the mare's neck beside his, and the three of them, in the last of the light, went home together across the park.